The most dangerous moments in war aren't the explosions you can see. They're the decisions being made while the cameras are forced to look away. And right now, the space between what's happening in the sky over Tel Aviv and what the world is allowed to watch has never been wider. Because as Iranian missiles and drones have intensified, Israel's wartime information controls have tightened too. The Israeli army has banned live broadcasts showing the skyline when sirens sound, and international networks say restrictions now explicitly target anything that could reveal the location of interceptors or the accuracy of incoming Iranian ballistic missiles. That doesn't just shape public perception, it shapes battlefield learning. If you can't see what hit, you can't easily prove what failed. And if you can't prove what failed, you can delay political panic at least for a while. Now layer one more factor on top: Iran's messaging war. Tehran's leadership circles have pushed a very specific image: resilience, presence, and defiance, while Israel's leadership projects operational control behind restrictions, shelters, and tight security. The contrast is the point. Iran wants the region to believe it can absorb pressure and keep striking. Israel wants the region to believe defenses are holding and the state remains unshaken. In modern conflict, those two beliefs can matter almost as much as the damage itself. And here's the uncomfortable truth: missile warfare isn't designed only to destroy buildings. It's designed to overload systems, air defenses, emergency services, and public psychology. Even when interceptors work, the attacker can win by forcing the defender to spend more, reveal more, and sleep less. That's why barrages matter. One missile is a headline. A sustained pattern is a strategy. So when you hear phrases like Tel Aviv under barrage, don't picture a single night of chaos. Picture a long equation. Iran launches, Israel intercepts, each side studies the other. The attacker looks for seams, timing, angles, saturation. The defender tries to adapt without broadcasting those adaptations to the enemy. That's exactly why live coverage becomes a battlefield issue, not a journalism issue. And it's not just Israel. Across the region, restrictions have spread on filming impacts, publishing locations, even showing damage. Officials argue it prevents panic and protects sensitive sites. But the deeper effect is that it creates information fog, where rumor moves faster than confirmation, and where psychological operations thrive. When the public can't verify what's real, the loudest narrative starts winning by default. That's where the hidden strategy shows itself. Iran doesn't need the world to see everything. Iran needs the world to doubt everything. Doubt whether Israel's defenses are truly airtight. Doubt whether leaders are fully in control. Doubt whether escalation has an off-ramp. Because doubt is contagious, and in geopolitics, contagion spreads through markets, alliances, and streets. Now zoom out one step. This isn't only Iran versus Israel, it's Iran versus the entire architecture that surrounds Israel. U.S. logistics, Gulf basing, missile defense networks, naval choke points, and the energy system that powers the global economy. The war becomes regional the moment the supply chains and sea lanes become targets, or even appear targetable. Which brings us to a detail that should make every military planner go silent for a second. A U.S. military refueling aircraft went down in Iraq during the operation, and the story split into two competing realities almost immediately. U.S. Central Command said the KC-135 crash was not caused by hostile fire or friendly fire, and that another aircraft involved landed safely. But in parallel, armed groups in the region claimed responsibility anyway, trying to turn a loss into a message. Whether it was mechanical failure, accident, or something else, the strategic effect is the same. It screams vulnerability in the most sensitive part of an air campaign: fuel and sustainment. Because aerial refueling isn't a side note, it's the spine of long-range air power. Tankers are slow, predictable, and high value. If a tanker is lost, no matter the reason, every commander asks the same brutal question: what happens if this becomes a pattern? AP News. And the second order effect is political. The U.S. public doesn't debate flight hour math. It reacts to headlines about losses, costs, and no clear end. That's why war messaging becomes domestic policy at full speed. Even in official reporting, you can see the pressure building, rising casualties, shifting timelines, and growing attention to the price tag. Now listen to this number carefully. Analysts cited by CNN report the war costing roughly $891 million per day, based on a breakdown of assets and strikes, nearly $1 billion every sunrise. And USA Today reports Pentagon munitions estimates reviewed by lawmakers suggesting the burn rate in weapons alone surged into the tens of billions early on, with defensive interceptors and long-range missiles among the cost drivers. This is not just expensive. It's the kind of spending that starts competing with everything else a government claims it can't afford. And here's the twist that most people miss. The biggest constraint may not be money, it may be stockpiles. Even discussions of cost repeatedly point back to munitions replacement, interceptors, and the pace at which high-end systems can be replenished. In other words, wars can become unsustainable long before the treasury is empty, because factories and logistics can't refill the battlefield fast enough. So when politicians throw around confident lines, claims of quick victory, total control, or easy domination, military reality quietly asks something else. At what rate are you spending irreplaceable time? Because time is what missile wars eat. This is where President Trump's rhetoric collides with physics. Tough talk can threaten fire and fury, but it can't reopen a sea lane by itself, and it can't lower oil prices by speech alone. And as the conflict escalates into maritime pressure, the global economy starts reacting in real time. Now we reach the pressure point that Iran has always kept on the table like a knife that never fully leaves the sheath, the Strait of Hormuz. About a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through that choke point, and the mere perception of disruption can push prices upward, because traders price fear faster than tankers can reroute. Reports describe traffic dropping, warnings escalating, and multiple attacks around the waterway as the risk spreads from land to sea. And when oil spikes, it doesn't stay over there. It shows up in shipping costs, food prices, airline routes, insurance premiums, and the political temperature of countries that thought they were spectators. The Guardian reports sharp moves in oil and gas pricing tied to escalation fears and disruption in the region. The Hill reports Brent crude briefly topping $100 again amid concerns over Iranian pressure in the strait, with rhetoric in markets spiraling toward worst-case numbers. So the battlefield expands without needing a single new front line. Iran doesn't have to invade anyone to hit global wallets. It just has to convince the world that passing through Hormuz is no longer routine. And that's why this war feels like a trap. CNN's reporting frames the Trump administration as boxed between two nightmares: global economic pain on one side and a naval catastrophe on the other. Escalate to protect shipping, and you risk direct clashes at sea. Hold back, and you risk letting markets interpret hesitation as weakness. And that raises prices anyway. Meanwhile, the war's bill keeps arriving. Al Jazeera lays out estimates ranging from roughly $800 million a day to spikes approaching $2 billion a day, depending on intensity, while stressing that the Pentagon hasn't issued a definitive official figure. That uncertainty matters because it becomes political ammunition inside Washington. One side calls it necessary, the other calls it a runaway drain. Either way, it's a war that's hard to pause without looking like you blinked. Now let's talk about the part people whisper about: hidden bases and secret targets. Here's what can be said responsibly. The U.S. footprint in the region is not a mystery in a general sense. Major bases and deployment patterns are widely known, and the mere presence of U.S. forces creates a map of likely nodes: airfields, ports, logistics hubs, command centers, and radar coverage. What's unknown to the public are specific readiness states, exact interception layouts, and the real-time vulnerabilities that only combat reveals. That's exactly why censorship and operational secrecy intensify during missile exchanges. And yes, major powers watch. Russia, China, and every serious military understand that wars are classrooms. They don't need to help Iran in a cartoonish way for the strategic effect to still matter. They can simply learn what intercepts what saturates what breaks first, and how quickly stockpiles bleed. In the long game, that learning shapes future deterrence far beyond the Middle East. Now, about claims you may hear online, like exact casualty numbers being hidden, or precise leadership locations, or dramatic stories about who is in a bunker and who is on the streets. Treat those as contested unless independently verified. What is verifiable is the environment that produces them: restricted footage, controlled broadcasting, and a war where both sides benefit from selective visibility. That's when propaganda thrives, not because people are stupid, but because the information pipeline is throttled. And that brings us back to Tel Aviv, because that city isn't just a population center, it's a symbol. When a missile lands near central districts, the message travels farther than the blast wave. The psychological objective is to make normal life feel temporary, to make investors hesitate, to make families leave, to make leaders feel the clock ticking louder than their speeches. Look at the images coming out under controlled access: smoke rising after impacts, reporters kept behind security cordons, and a constant tension between what can be filmed and what cannot. Even when you see only fragments, you can feel the larger story pressing behind them, like a door that won't fully open. Now add the maritime front again, because it's the silent barrage. The Hill reports Tehran escalating attacks against vessels and signaling that oil flows could be choked, with markets reacting violently. The Guardian reports shipping warnings, tankers stacking up, and fears of effective closure driving sharp price spikes. This isn't theater. It's leverage, weaponized geography that turns a regional war into a global tax. And once the world starts paying that tax, pressure spreads to every capital, including Washington. Because every day the war continues, the administration isn't only measuring damage on targets, it's measuring damage in approval ratings, inflation expectations, and the credibility of promises made before the first strike. That's why the cost reporting hits so hard. CNN cites daily war cost estimates around $891 million. USA Today cites munitions spending and highlights how quickly expensive long-range weapons and defensive interceptors can rack up totals that dwarf domestic programs. This is how wars turn into political sinkholes, not with one catastrophic loss, but with a steady grind that drains money, attention, and options. And the refueling aircraft loss in Iraq again, whatever the cause, amplifies that feeling. It becomes a symbol of risk, a reminder that even the most advanced military machine has fragile, high-value arteries. When those arteries are stressed, every mission becomes more expensive, more cautious, and more politically exposed. So here's the geopolitical bottom line, stripped of slogans. Iran doesn't need to win in the Hollywood sense. Iran needs to survive, keep striking enough to impose costs, and widen the battlefield into oil, shipping, and U.S. domestic politics. Israel doesn't need to destroy Iran completely. It needs to prevent strategic surprise and maintain deterrence without bleeding legitimacy. The United States doesn't just need battlefield success. It needs an exit ramp that doesn't look like retreat while the meter runs near $1 billion a day and oil markets punish every hint of uncertainty. And now the question that cuts through every dramatic clip, every censorship debate, every threat and counter-threat, because it's the only question that matters when the Strait of Hormuz is trembling and missiles are shaping politics in real time. If joining Israel's war was supposed to end the danger quickly, why does the danger look bigger every day? And who exactly is going to pay the final price when the world's most important choke point becomes the battlefield?